Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, 10 years ago, today's guest wanted to find a way to help his deaf father simply send and receive text messages. Specifically, he wanted to enable his dad's phone to flash whenever he got a text from his wife. And today's guest's name is Zach Supalla, and what began as a personal mission actually evolved into an IoT tech company. So I wanted to find out more about how his personal drive, coupled with his professional ambitions, propelled his firm to success. And since its inception in 2012, the company, called Particle, has grown immensely to become the most widely used IoT platform, making it easier for over 8,500 companies to bring their physical products online. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the US, where Zach, the founder and CEO of Particle, is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Zach. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Zach Supalla. I am the CEO of a company called Particle. Particle is the leading IoT Platform-as-a-Service. So we help manufacturers introduce connectivity and intelligence into the machines and devices they bring to market. We have customers like Jacuzzi and Watsco, the largest HVAC distributor in North America, Goodyear, a bunch of startups creating all sorts of connected products. We have a few hundred customers whose products we power, and a few 100,000 developers who build IoT products on our platform.
Awesome. And one of the things I always try and do on this podcast is find out more about the guest's origin story and what put them on this path. And when I was doing a bit of research on you, I learned that 10 years ago, you were inspired to just find a way to help your deaf father send and receive text messages. Specifically, you wanted to enable your dad's phone to flash when he got a text from his wife. But can you tell me a little bit more about that moment in your life and the problems you encountered, and ultimately what inspired you to turn to tech to build a solution?
Yeah. So I was an aspiring entrepreneur. I wanted to build a business, but I didn't quite know what, and I wasn't sure what area to focus on. And I was sort of looking out for opportunities and ideas. And my mom came to me and said, is there any way that you could figure out how to get dad's flasher to flash when he receives a text message? And so the context here is my dad is deaf. He has been his whole life, and so I'm fluent in sign language, and that's a big part of the world that I grew up in. And my whole life, there's been a flasher in the house, and so a sort of strobe that would flash when somebody rang the doorbell or when somebody called on the TTY. And these are all hardwired systems, right? Like there's a set of ports in the back of the flasher that if there's a signal that comes in through one of these ports, it'll flash. And so my mom, obviously the world has changed a lot. And one of those changes is that we now all have cell phones, and my dad has a cell phone and he uses it to send and receive texts, but those are not hardwired systems anymore. And so my mom looks at the flasher and says, well, I can't get a hold of your dad anymore if he doesn't have his phone in his pocket. And can we make his flasher flash with if he receives a text message? And I looked at it and said, well, if we wanted to do that, it would require an entirely different technology. And that flasher would have to have an API. We'd have to send an API call to trigger it. And, I didn't say that out loud to my mom. But that's how I was thinking about what the solution to that problem would be. And that kind of led me down a path of exploring connected smart lighting, and then following that more broadly, sort of IoT in general, where it became clear to me that that concept of products with APIs, where physical assets should have some interface where a software developer or software application can trigger action or request information from, or somehow interact with that device or machine, that was a need of 1,000 different industries. And so that concept eventually would turn into Particle, providing that technology solution to manufacturers around the world.
So ultimately, what began as that personal mission, that went on to become the IoT tech company that is now, right?
That's correct.
Wow. And of course, 90% of startups fail in their first year. So was that always in the back of your mind when you set out on that journey? And how did you ensure that you were one of the 10% that survived and thrived?
I always sort of assumed in some sense, and I hate to say this, I assumed we would not be one of the 10%.
Yeah.
Because I think that when you're an entrepreneur, I think you have to be a little bit arrogant. You have to believe that you're special, right? Yeah. Because if 90% fail, then why would I believe I'm one of the 10%, right? And so I did think I had something to contribute and some reason to believe I might be successful. But I also thought, well, I'm best case, I'm increasing the odds from 10% to 20%, right? Still more likely than not that this thing all collapses in a burst of flames. And I think that attitude ended up being very important because it meant that I could operate and my team could operate without fear. We never really worried about failure. And I think that allowed us to take risks and place bets that may or may not have panned out, but through a series of, either doing it right or getting lucky or some combination of the two, we managed to beat the odds.
Fantastic. And of course, from there, Particle was born, which does provide everything you need to power an IoT product from device to cloud and ultimately reprogram the world. So can you tell me a little bit more about what it is and the problems that you solve, just for anyone listening that's just hearing about you guys for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think explaining Particle requires a little bit of an explanation about what IoT really is, because we hear this term. It's sort of an industry jargon, buzzwordy term that has come to mean a lot of things and not that, and nothing at the same time. At the end of the day, what we mean when we say IoT is we're taking the technologies that we've been using to connect people, primarily through PCs and smartphones and tablets and things like that, right? But like those are sort of entry points for a human being to become connected via the World Wide Web. Right. We've been doing that, depending on where you start the clock, since the 70s and 80s, or for most of us on a day-to-day basis, the mid 90s is maybe where the first time when we logged on to the web, got an AOL account or something along those lines. Those technologies were all designed around a set of standards that were necessary to support humans communicating with each other and delivering content. Right. So the web is designed around content delivery. Yeah. And if you are trying to browse a website, cool. That's exactly what you need. Now, the fact that there is a cellular network everywhere, there's a Wi-Fi network everywhere, there's a Bluetooth device everywhere, means we have the opportunity to take that technology and apply it to machines and devices. Right. So if you take any sort of physical asset that's out in the world somewhere, right? Look at an air conditioner, for instance. There are opportunities to make your air conditioner a better air conditioner by making it more intelligent, right? If it had more information about whether people are home or not, if it was able to report back to its owners or to the manufacturer who's responsible for servicing it when it's starting to experience problems, right? You can see how there's value in connecting that air conditioner to people or to other machinery. And that air conditioner, regardless of where it is surrounded by a bunch of wireless networks, right? They're there because we are there and we have introduced those networks to the world. So how do you get that thing onto that network? Well, you start to run into a bunch of technical problems because while it is true that the network is present, all of that technology was designed for people and computers. And so when you look at a machine, right, something that is nuts and bolts and gears and metal, there are many ways in which that thing was never designed to be connected, and the networks were never designed to accommodate things like that. And so a lot of what Particle does is essentially take all of that technology, tweak it in such a way that makes it viable for machines and devices, and then sell that technology stack to manufacturers to say, hey, look, you are an air conditioner manufacturer. You are very, very good at designing and manufacturing a very high quality product. in order to build an IoT product, there's all these things that you need to know around networking and security and wireless radios, and that is not your expertise. Particle can provide all those capabilities to you so you can create a great connected product.
And I think I should highlight that since its inception, I think it was in 2012, Particle has grown immensely to be the most widely used IoT platform that ultimately makes it easier for startups and some big name companies as well, such as Jacuzzi, ChampionX, I think Wasco, and over 8,500 others bring their physical products online.
Yep,
and I appreciate you probably can't share any big names or too many big clients, but are there any use cases you can share that will just bring what we're talking about to life here?
Yeah, I mean, a good example is I'll talk a little bit about what ChampionX is doing now. ChampionX is not a commonly known brand. They're a big player in oil and gas technologies, and so the particular device that they've created on Particle is called SUFI, and it is a continuous methane emission sensor. So these are the kinds of problems I think we don't think about on a day-to-day basis. We don't think about who's out there solving these problems, but in this case, it's become at least a little bit more visible through regulations. So methane emissions are a big problem in oil and gas. Methane emissions are generally not an intended outcome of oil and gas extraction. Those systems are designed to keep methane from being emitted into the atmosphere. Methane is a greenhouse gas. It's a particularly bad one. And so it's a major contributor to climate change. And so oil and gas companies are, in some cases voluntarily, and in other cases by regulation, starting to think more about how they can reduce what's called a methane escape, right? An unintended emission of methane. The traditional way that this has been done is by monitoring oil and gas rigs with flyovers. And so our customer originally started as a startup that was created by some former pilots. And so they previously were a business who flew over oil and gas sites and with sensors to detect methane, and they would report back if they found anything. And more recently, that a pilot flying a plane business has been displaced by drones, which is you can imagine is a little bit cheaper to do. You can do it more frequently. But the real holy grail is what's called a continuous methane emission sensor, which says instead of flying something over this thing on some regularity, we're just going to permanently install a sensor that's going to sit on the site. And anytime there's methane detected, it's going to immediately notify the right people so they can fix it faster. And by doing that, the amount of methane that's emitted out into the atmosphere is significantly reduced. And so now how do you do that? That means you need a sensor. It needs to be on site. It needs to be connected to some wireless network, in this case, a cellular network, reporting back that information, presenting it to the right people at the right time. And so that's, a particular example where most of us don't think about that kind of equipment and that kind of site, but we do understand methane and greenhouse gases and climate change, and they're a company that's out solving that problem.
And I suspect, as you've explained that, you've set off a few alarm bells and light bulbs in people's heads. So for business leaders and maybe even brands listening, do you have any examples around how this integrated IoT platform as a service can actually help businesses do things like connect, manage and deploy software applications to connected devices, or even go beyond that if they're thinking bigger, to launch industry-changing connected products? Because there's so much scope here, right?
Yes. I mean, there's 1,000 ways in which people can introduce connectivity into this, that, and the other. And I think that is one of the biggest flaws of IoT as an industry, is that it can be applied anywhere. And some of those ideas are good ones and some of those ideas are bad ones. And I think IoT as an industry, got some flack in the sort of 2016, 2017 era, where there were a lot of companies launching, Wilson launched a connected basketball that will help you count your shots. And L'Oreal announced a connected hairbrush that listens to the sound of you brushing your hair with a microphone. And based on the sounds, it suggests hair products that you could use to improve the quality of your hair. These are products that cost hundreds of dollars, right? They're gimmicky novelty things. They don't need to exist. They're not solving a real problem. And you can look at anything around you and make a case for it being connected. I think that the great products start with not a thing and a connection, but a thing and a problem, right? So I have I have an oil rig. It emits methane. It's 2022. Connectivity and intelligence as technologies are sort of like available to me. How could I use these things to solve that problem, right? If I am in the business of air conditioning, how do I make sure that air conditioners don't break on the hottest day of the summer, right? You've experienced over the last few days a massive heat wave. Perhaps without air conditioning, as I know that's not much like San Francisco, right? Air conditioning is not always present. But on days like that, when there's heat waves, every air conditioner that is present is strained as hard as it's ever going to be strained on the same day, which means that's the day when all of the air conditioners break, right? So if you're in the business of servicing and maintaining air conditioners, this is a huge problem to you, because that day you get 1,000 phone calls, and the first couple you're able to say, yeah, I'll come out and fix it. And then from there on, you're saying it's going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be 4 weeks, it's going to be 8 weeks before I can fix it. Well, this is a heat wave that lasts for 3 days. And if people don't get the cool air that they need, I mean, that can be deadly. And so what can you do to predict failure in advance? What can you do to know 2 weeks before the heat wave which air conditioners are more likely to break? And can you do preventative maintenance? Can you fix them in advance, right? I think all the great use cases for IoT start with a problem that needs to be solved, and then ask the question of how can connectivity and intelligence help solve that problem?
100% with you on that. And if you look beyond the gimmicky things, is there anything in particular that really excites you about this space and the future and opening up that art of the possible?
What we see a lot of right now is an extraordinary effort that's going towards solving climate change from a lot of different directions. And I think that this is a result of some combination of real economic incentives and government pressure and just human beings wanting to go fix a problem. The amount of entrepreneurial energy that's going towards how do I reduce energy consumption? How do I mitigate the environmental impacts that we're already starting to experience because of climate change? I mean, it's happening everywhere. 85% of our customers probably have, if they're not directly a environmental impact business, environmental impact is one of the top 3 reasons and use cases for their product. And so I'm excited to see how much energy is heading in that direction, and it gives me some degree of confidence that we will actually start to solve what is a really big problem. But it will happen because tens of thousands of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial individuals working for bigger companies are trying to figure out how to fix it.
And what's next for you guys? Where do you go from here, and what role do you see yourselves playing in that?
I think where we are an enabling technology. So the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial folks who use our platform to create a new product or to solve a problem are really the sort of protagonists in our story. We go where they go. I think that what that means for our business is we're very focused on how do we make this stuff even easier, right? How do we make it so that anybody can create an IoT product? How do we really democratize this? So any business, any person, any company, regardless of their technical knowledge, regardless of how much, if we start talking about antenna design and how to get a really good wireless connection, regardless of how engaged they are in that conversation versus whether they would say, I don't want to know anything about any of that stuff, right? We want to make so anybody can do this stuff. And so we work every day to try and make it easier and make this industry bigger and more impactful and solving more and more real problems.
Love that. And we started the podcast today talking about your origin story, what put you on this path. As we come full circle, I'm going to ask you to leave everyone listening with a personal note of inspiration. And by that, I mean, is there a song that you can leave us with that we can add to our Spotify playlist, or a book that we can add to our Amazon wish list? All I ask is what you're going to leave us with, and is there a story behind that choice?
Yeah. So the book I'll recommend, one of my favorite recent books is What You Do Is Who You Are by Ben Horowitz. So Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz, a well-known entrepreneur and venture capitalist, wrote what was one of my favorite books in sort of business tech books, which is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is a story about, it's his entrepreneurial story of building his own business and all the challenges they faced, kind of the real story of entrepreneurship and about how difficult it is, and how great companies exist because they manage to survive through extraordinary hardship and come out the other side. It's an incredible book, and I've gained a lot of respect for him as an entrepreneur. He then wrote more recently a book called What You Do Is Who You Are, which is all about culture, and how a business culture forms, how it can be changed. And I think that for the kinds of people who are running businesses or creating businesses, who care a lot about what kind of company it is you're creating, not just what you're trying to accomplish with the business, but actually creating a good company that people want to work for, that you want to work for, with great people that you want to work with that are growing in their careers and motivated to help the company achieve great things. Understanding how much of that is how much of culture is designed either on purpose or by accident by the behaviors of the leaders of that company, and what that means for what you should or shouldn't do to turn your company into one with a great culture is it's a spectacular book.
Awesome. Well, I'll get that added to our Amazon wish list. And for anyone listening that's just been inspired by your story, wants to find out more information about Particle, or maybe even contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, our website is www.particle.io. And if you're interested in chatting with us, there's a contact sales form, and our sales team would love to chat with you about how we can support you in creating whatever future you're trying to create.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story today. Such a powerful story that began with simply wanting to help your dad's phone to flash when he got a text from your mum there. It's incredibly cool what you've created and the journey that you've been on, and hopefully it will inspire startup founders around the world too. But just a big thank you for sharing that with me today, Zach.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Wow, what an amazing and inspirational story. It's proper heartwarming, isn't it, to encounter such a personal problem that was impacting his family life and looking for a solution. And that personal mission, how that turned into a hugely successful IoT tech company. In fact, it's one of the most widely used IoT platforms in the world, which is just amazing. So a big thank you to Zach for coming on and sharing his story today. And as I always say, I want to get your story shared on here. That is why I commit to recording this podcast every day and serving you, my loyal audience. I want to get these stories out there and prove that technology works best when it brings people together. So email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, and let's get your story on here too. Other than that, just a huge thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.